Welcome back to today's deep dive. We're going to do things a little differently over the next few days. Because it's the holidays, markets slow down, headlines recycle, and instead of reacting to the same price movements and the same talking points, I want to take a step back and do something more foundational. This is going to be a multi-part deep dive, one part per day, where each episode builds on the last, and instead of starting with Bitcoin or modern finance, we're going all the way back to the ancestral roots of money itself. Why money was created in the first place, why humans needed it, what people traded before money existed, why societies across the world independently gravitated toward things like gold, and how trust, scarcity, and human behavior shaped everything that followed. By the time we reach the final part of this series, Bitcoin won't feel like a random invention or a speculative idea, but like the latest chapter in a very long human story. To understand money, you have to start long before coins, banks, or even written language. Early human societies did not think in terms of wealth, savings, or economic growth. They thought in terms of survival, food, shelter, protection, warmth, and community. Archaeological evidence from Paleolithic and early Neolithic sites shows that humans lived in small, tightly knit groups where cooperation was essential. Specialization emerged very early. Some individuals hunted, others gathered, others crafted tools or clothing, and others took on protective or leadership roles. This specialization created surplus in some areas and shortages in others, which naturally led to exchange. Before money existed, people traded directly, not because it was efficient in an abstract sense, but because it was necessary. If one group had excess grain and another had livestock, trade allowed both groups to survive seasonal scarcity. Anthropological records and studies of early societies show that barter was often embedded within social relationships rather than formal transactions. Exchange was frequently tied to reciprocity, obligation, and reputation. In small groups, memory acted as a ledger. You remembered who contributed, who took more than they gave, and who could be trusted. But as populations grew and groups interacted with outsiders, this system began to strain. Archaeological evidence from early settlements in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant shows increasing trade networks as early as 9000 BCE, including obsidian, flint, shells, and other materials transported over long distances. These early trade networks made barter increasingly inefficient because trust was no longer personal and memory no longer scaled. The fundamental problem with barter is that it requires what economists later called a double coincidence of wants, meaning both parties must want what the other has at the same time and in the right quantities. This problem becomes unmanageable as trade networks grow. Historical reconstructions of early trade suggest that disputes over value were common because there was no standard measure. How much grain equaled a tool, or a day of labor, or a goat depended entirely on negotiation, context, and power dynamics. This uncertainty increased friction and conflict, which early societies had a strong incentive to reduce. Violence was costly, and instability threatened survival. Over time, humans began to gravitate toward objects that could act as intermediaries in exchange. Archaeological evidence shows that different societies independently adopted different forms of proto-money. Cowrie shells were used extensively in Africa, South Asia, and China. Beads made from stone or bone appear in burial sites and trade contexts across Europe and Asia. Salt was used as a medium of exchange in parts of Africa and the Roman world, so valuable that the word salary derives from it. Livestock served as a unit of account in many pastoral societies, which is why words related to cattle appear in early concepts of wealth across Indo-European languages. What mattered was not the object itself, but that it was widely accepted, scarce enough to hold value, and durable enough to be stored. This is a crucial point. Money did not begin as an abstract concept imposed from above. It emerged organically from repeated human behavior. Societies experimented, discarded what didn't work, and converged on what did. Over time, certain materials proved superior. Metals, particularly gold and silver, gradually became dominant where they were available. Archaeological records show that gold objects were used for ornamentation and ritual as early as 4600 BCE in the Varna necropolis in modern-day Bulgaria, one of the earliest known sites with extensive gold artifacts. These objects were not just decorative, Their concentration, craftsmanship, and burial context suggest they already carried social and economic significance. Gold's rise was not accidental. Its physical properties made it uniquely suited to act as a store of value. It does not corrode, decay, or lose mass over time. It is divisible without losing value, and it is scarce but not impossibly rare. These properties meant that gold could preserve purchasing power across long periods. This mattered enormously in societies where agricultural output varied year to year and where survival depended on planning beyond the immediate present. Gold allowed value to be stored, transported, and transferred without spoiling or degrading. It turned labor and surplus into something that could survive time. Written records from ancient Mesopotamia, particularly Sumer, provide some of the earliest clear evidence of structured economic systems. By around 3300 BCE, clay tablets recorded transactions, debts, and obligations, often denominated in silver by weight, even when no physical silver changed hands. This is important because it shows that money was already becoming a unit of account before it was always a medium of exchange. Temples and palaces acted as economic centers, storing grain and other goods, issuing rations, and keeping records. Silver functioned as the reference point that tied these records together. Even then, money was deeply linked to trust and record-keeping. At the same time, gold increasingly became the preferred store of long-term value. Unlike grain or livestock, gold did not require constant maintenance. Unlike tools, it did not wear out. This allowed wealth to be accumulated and transferred across generations. Dynasties, inheritance, and long-term planning all relied on this ability. In this sense, gold did not just enable trade, it reshaped social structures. It allowed inequality to persist, power to concentrate, and institutions to endure. By the time we reach ancient Egypt, gold had become central to state power. Egypt's access to gold mines in Nubia gave it a strategic advantage, and gold became associated with divine authority and permanence. Records from the Old Kingdom show gold being used for tribute, religious offerings, and elite exchange. In parallel, silver dominated in Mesopotamia, while China developed its own monetary systems based initially on cowrie shells and later bronze objects. The important takeaway is that different civilizations, isolated from one another, independently developed money-like systems because the underlying human problems were the same. Money solved the problem of trust among strangers. It reduced friction. It enabled cooperation at scale. But it also introduced something new: abstraction. Once value could be represented symbolically, it could be recorded, promised, delayed, and manipulated. Written records transformed money from a physical object into an accounting concept. This is where money begins to evolve beyond simple exchange. By the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, coinage emerged as a way to standardize and authenticate value. The earliest widely recognized coins appeared in Lydia, around the 7th century BCE, made from electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. These coins were stamped by authority, guaranteeing weight and purity. This reduced the need for constant weighing and assaying, increasing trade efficiency dramatically. Coins spread rapidly throughout the Greek world and beyond. With coinage, money became not just a medium of exchange and store of value, but also a tool of political power. Rulers could mint coins bearing their image, reinforcing authority and identity. However, even at this stage, money retained a direct link to physical value. A gold coin was valuable because of the gold it contained. Trust existed, but it was anchored in material reality. This anchor mattered. It limited abuse. You could not create gold out of nothing. Mining required labor, time, and risk. This constrained the supply of money and preserved its ability to store value over long periods. As trade expanded further, particularly along routes like the Silk Road, carrying large quantities of metal became increasingly dangerous and impractical. Merchants began depositing gold with trusted institutions and carrying receipts instead. These receipts were transferable and eventually circulated as money themselves. This is where the story begins to shift in a profound way. When money becomes a claim on value rather than value itself, the system depends entirely on trust in the issuer. Initially, this worked because claims were redeemable. But history shows a consistent pattern. Once institutions realize that not all claims are redeemed at once, the temptation to issue more claims than underlying value becomes overwhelming. This is not a moral judgment, it is a behavioral reality. Humans respond to incentives. And the incentive to create more money than you have backing, it has repeated itself across cultures and centuries. This is the point where money begins to change character. What started as a tool to reduce friction and enable cooperation begins to acquire a darker side. Control, power, influence. But that story belongs in the next part. For now, what matters is this. Money did not begin as greed. It began as a solution to a survival problem. It emerged organically, shaped by human behavior and physical reality. Gold rose not because it was imposed, but because it worked better than alternatives. Trust sat at the center of every system. And whenever trust was anchored to something real, money functioned as a reliable store of human effort. In the next episode, we move forward. We look at how abstraction, record-keeping, and promises transformed money from a neutral tool into something that could be exploited. We'll look at debt, early banking, and the gradual separation of money from physical reality. Because once that separation begins, the system changes forever. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, follow for the next part of this holiday series, and we will see you at the top.